All right. So, how you guys doing? Are you ready? All right, so I see a few people in here already. So I got about another 5 minutes till I start here. So I want to make sure you guys can all hear me and see me in this little window over here. Put me in a box. I can't get out. So I hope you guys are having a... I see we got some comments about the Belgium chocolate. So there's a point of contention here. I do. I have fiber mesh beard. I'm still grooming it. It's going to take a little while. I need a little more poly groups. So yes, it's my winter beard. I also have relocated. I'm in a conference room here because my internet at my house is horrible. So I have my portable Frankenstein set up here for you guys. So hopefully everything goes well. I've got a really amazing monitor as my secondary here today. It's stellar. Paul's he really wants to steal it. Its resolution is so great. But it seems like it's doing the job. So hopefully that everything goes smooth. So how many of you guys have got and upgraded to ZBrush 2020 already? Anyone in the stream? Paul should also be in chat formulating answers to your questions. I'm going to try to keep it monitored, but you never know. Sometimes I see your questions and I'm just going to choose, not to answer them. So it could happen. Could happen. But we got Paul in here too. Let's got a few more minutes here until the go time. Daisuke's in here. You guys check out Paul's stream as well. So we had his. There's a link here in the center of what you guys are viewing. If you go to that link there, there'll be the restreams of the stuff that we've done. I think there's also going to be a link to Pavlovich's stuff and also Pablo. So good stuff there. I do so much fiber mesh. And it's still a little sparse. I'm still growing it in. So I hope you guys are doing well. A few more minutes. Three more to be exact. I got a bunch of stuff I'm going to cover. I got pages of notes I'm just going to throw around. I've got to use a tablet. I got my ZBrush shirt on. I got my ZBrush water bottle. This one's seen some use. See, it's got like dents and scratches. Paul will tell you that you're not supposed to put it in the dishwasher. That's bad for it, that there was a note or something that was inside the bottle that says, hey, don't put it in the dishwasher. It works fine in the dishwasher. It works fine. So you tell Paul, it is dishwasher safe. Oh no ZBrush gloves today. I did not bring the ZBrush gloves. All right, 2 minutes. 2 minutes, counting it down. Letting people get in here. Here's some comments that you guys are liking the new features. It's good to hear. I'm going to cover some stuff that we've seen questions on to start. And then we'll go into kind of formulating some different workflows we've been messing with in 2020. So hopefully some stuff that you guys haven't thought about yet or haven't tried that will spur your imagination and creativity. All right, we got 1 minute. Tell your friends, get on now. I'm going to start here. It's going to start. One minute. I don't have a countdown timer though, but we're going to start exactly when my phone here tells me it's 2 o'clock. My time, 11 o'clock, LA time. All right, get stretched here. Get my stretch. There we go. I do not have a sculpt off bell. They don't let me retain that. I'd probably be deaf if they let me have it. Like if it lived next to me, I'd probably ring it a lot. You guys feel free if you have your own. Start it off. Start ringing the bell. I also don't have Jessica here. She's usually my cohort in these video stuff. All right. So thank you all for showing up for the stream here. If you guys are tuning in and you're not aware, ZBrush 2020 has been released. So it has been out for over a week now. So if you guys have not upgraded and you have a license to ZBrush, this is a free upgrade. So go get it. There's no point not to upgrade to 2020, okay? Now with this, 2020 has a bunch of new things in it. So we have a page here. You can just go to do a search for just ZBrush2020.com and you're gonna get this nice little page. There's a bunch of videos that are covering a lot of the different things that are in here. So Paul was showing some of the Morph UV stuff. We've been showing the extractor brushes off with Pablo's models there. We got some history recall stuff, infinite depth, which I'll hit on in this one. And then the adjusting colors for poly paint and also texture. And then analyzing some print stuff, which I'll touch as well. And some draft analysis, and cam view, and silhouette, and of course ZZ. So a lot of stuff here in this release. Now one thing I want to hit on before we get into ZBrush here itself is that we are running a special. So we're running a launch special for 2020. And so we're giving discounts on perpetual licenses and also the first months of our subscription plans. So there's multiple avenues you can get into ZBrush. So if you haven't gotten into ZBrush yet, I bought ZBrush, I don't know, man, it's been years now. And I think I paid around $400 and I never had to pay again for ZBrush. Bought it once and it was done. And so it's carried me through game development stuff, and then now I'm at Pixelogic as well. So it's definitely one of those things that it's been worth its weight in gold just for paying the price. And so our perpetual license has a discount right now, or not discount, which is our launch special, which is $7.95. And this is a one-time fee. And so this is only gonna be around for about a little less than 2 weeks. So if you're not partaking in this, go ahead and do that. If you guys are also ZBrush Core users, we're also doing a launch special on that as well. So there is an upgrade price. If you have ZBrush Core, you can upgrade to the professional version. So multiple ways, the subscription stuff, you can go for months, 1 month to 6 months. So a lot of different avenues. The 1 month stuff you need for a project, you can do it for a month and then get off. There's no reason not to, let's just put it there. No reason. So go ahead, ZBrush, launch special, doesn't happen. I mean, this is a very rare thing, and for 2020 we're doing it. So we don't do this all the time, so definitely take part of it. If you have any friends that are looking to, it's a great Christmas gift. So all sorts of stuff. All right, so now I'm going to hop over to ZBrush here and make sure you guys can see my screen. I'm gonna move it side to side here. See the sphere? Everyone see the sphere. Look at that sphere. All right, so before I get into some of the feature stuff, I want to hit on things that we've seen in the community with you guys as you've been using 2020. So as I said, ZBrush 2020 was released about a week ago. And so if you have a license of ZBrush, you can log into my My Licenses page and download the 2020 upgrade for free. So with this, we had some questions on things. So we had some users that launched ZBrush, and they had a question about this little area right over here. So this is the thumbnail view, and the thumbnail view allows you to see your model in thumbnail form. So if you guys were at the ZBrush Summit, we had a version of ZBrush that was running that was using this, and so we did an emoji challenge, and you could sculpt your emoji, and then you could see it at that thumbnail size. Now the preferences for this are going to live in the preferences palette and then the thumbnail area here, and this is where the options that are going to control this. So if you want to toggle this off, you can come over here and click this thumbnail on and off, and that's going to turn it on and off. You can also switch it out of silhouette mode to non-silhouette mode. So right now it's in silhouette mode, which is going to give you a two-tone view of it. So you can have a background color down here, and then you're going to have your object, which is going to be the opposite of that background. So with the sphere here, you can see I'm getting a black circle on a white background, right? So if I change this out of silhouette mode, just toggle this off, you're going to see now I'm getting that view without the silhouette mode, and I'm just seeing the thumbnail of the model. Now you can also control the size of this by just clicking and dragging on it. So if you click and drag on this like this, it's going to increase the size of your thumbnail view, and you'll see up at the top there, it's going to tell you what size it's going to increase to. And then if you want to zoom, you can hold Shift and then click and drag, and that's going to perform a magnification. So let's say, as an example, in preferences, I want my thumbnail size to be, say, that emoji size of 72, so I've set it there. But then I want it to be a little bit larger so I can see it, so I can increase that magnification. And so now I'm going to see that 72 by 72 size image up there. It's always going to use the longest dimension, and then I'm going to see it zoomed in. So that's what the magnify is going to do here, and you can control it from these sliders here, or you can click and drag to increase the size, Shift click and drag to magnify. And if you want to change the background to transparent, we can just go back to that preferences panel, and you can just click and drag on any of the color sliders inside of ZBrush to pick colors. So if I want to set this to black, I can just click here on background, drag it over here and pick black. And now since it's black, ZBrush is going to render it as transparent. And so now I'm just seeing that thumbnail view. If I want to change it back to the silhouette mode, come over here and click that. No, silhouette mode. Another thing we've added that Paul actually didn't have in his version when he was showing you guys this is that if you click on this, you can apply a background image to the thumbnail view. So clicking on the area here is going to open up a pick menu here, so you can import in a texture. You can also select one in the ones that are already loaded. So if I want this as my background, I can click that. And now instead of that transparent black background, I now have an image loaded into that thumbnail view. You can clear this out as well. So let's say you have the image in there, you're using it to kind of feel where that silhouette reference is. You can now click this again and just turn texture off, and that's going to return it back to using the background color. And then once again, to hide it, you can go to the preferences panel, click on thumbnail, and that's going to toggle it off. So little thing there with the thumbnail view that we had some users having questions on. Now the next thing I want to cover is the extractor brushes. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the extractor in this one since Paul covered the majority of it, but I want to hit on some things that we've seen in the community with you guys and just cover what's going on there. So as an example, let's say I have a sphere. So here I have my lovely sphere. And I'm just going to go and grab the damn standard brush and set it to Z-add. I'm just going to make a little sculptural mark on this. So I'm going to come across the surface here. I'm going to come in and drag this out, maybe make a circle, and then we're going to feed into like another circle. And so I have this little detail. So let's say I have a model, I sculpted this on it, and now I want to grab it using the extractor brushes and then use it elsewhere on my mesh. So you've got your model, you've got your details. Now I'm going to come to the brush palette and I'm going to select the extractor brush, which is right here. It's my fiber mesh beard. It's my winter beard. It's very sparse fiber mesh. And so now I have the extractor brush. Now with the extractor brushes, if you just activate the extractor just by selecting it, and you come across and you try to use it, this is where you're gonna get, right? So it's just sculpting, right? So you're not getting the magic of the brush yet. So you gotta remember what the extractor brush is it a brush that's set up to use the output of the alpha from brush process. So this alpha from brush button here is what the power of the extractor is. The extraction is coming from this button right here. It's not specifically with the brush. So any brush can extract the details out of a model. So we just set up specific brushes that are already ready to go. So you can select these, and then when you activate the from brush mode here, by clicking this button here or pressing G on your keyboard, you can then extract that, and then that brush is ready to use that extracted part. So with this, I'm going to come across my model here, and I'm going to click G, which is going to put me into the extractor mode, or the from brush mode. And I'm going to increase my draw size here, and I just wanted to kind of engulf this shape here. And then to capture the shape, you can just click and drag, go across the surface, and now I'm going to generate that alpha. Now, for this one here, with the example, I've generated my alpha stroke here. Now I want to reapply it. So I'm going to come across the surface, click and drag, and you're going to notice this is what I'm getting. So not exactly this, right? So this is one of the things that I want to kind of explain to you guys why this is happening. So the extractor brush has basically two ways of working. The first way, it's going to extract from the lowest undo your subtool has. So it's going to look at subtool 1, which is all the way down here, and then it's going to compare it to the subtool you're on, or not the subtool, sorry. It's going to look at the undo history point all the way down here, and it's going to compare it to the undo history point you're on, and then it's going to calculate the offset between that, extracting the difference, okay? The other way is it's just going to use a point that you set on the timeline. So with this example, why I'm getting this here is because if I go all the way back down to my first undo, this is what my mesh started with, right? I have this tessellated version of the sphere. So what ZBrush is doing, since I don't have a point stored on this bar, it's using that first undo. This is the first undo. So it's looking at this, and then it's comparing it to this. And so it's giving me the difference between those, which is why it's coming out with those edges, because these edges are actually in that first undo. So that if you ever get any kind of things when you're extracting something and it's giving you this kind of looks like topology inside your brush, check your undo stuff. So to resolve this, what we need to do is we need to go to our undo history bar up here and go to the point in our timeline before we sculpted on our mesh. And that would be right here. So here we have the nice smooth sphere. So now with this, I want to store this as my point instead of having ZBrush use that first undo. So there's a few ways you could do this. You could go to the edit option here and you could delete your older undo history. So that's one way, which would then force the undo you're on to be that first undo, and then ZBrush would use that instead. Or you can hold Control and you can click on this, and now that's going to store that as the point of reference. So that's going to be the point of reference now, not that first undo. So now if I go up and undo to the one that I sculpted on, and now if I do the extract again, so activating that from brush mode by pressing G on my keyboard, I'm going to come across the surface and grab it. This is now going to calculate this, and now if I click and drag, now I'm getting more what I'm looking for. So that is the key part there. You want to make sure that you have an undo point on your timeline, or your undo does not have like a low polygon model, because it's looking, ZBrush is looking at from one point to the other point, and that's giving you the result. Now also with the, we'll see on this one here that I did, you see I'm getting these edges along too, and that's just based on how I picked this up. So if I picked it up with more border, then I'm going to get a little bit less of this as I sculpt my model. All right, everybody got that? Now, another thing, so let's say your undo point on your model is the part of your model as well. So this was with the undo and then actually adding it. So let's go to a model, same thing here, but you can see I have no undos. So ZBrush, the thing we've added is this, and so even if you don't have undos, and say you've done a sculpt on your model and you want to extract some of the data, well, let's say you don't have anything to go back to compare that to. But we've added a calculation that will look at the model, and it's going to attempt to grab the difference out of it. So with this here, I have no undos. So if I grab this one by pressing G, dragging across the model, this one's also going to give me a result. And then now I can also apply this to the surface as well. So even if you don't have undos or a part of your model that's clean compared to a part that has the sculptural detail on it, you'll still be able to extract the stuff out and then use it on the surface of your mesh. So a little thing there with the extractor. Yes, you guys can ask questions. I'll try to answer them. I can't make promises though. Paul's also in here too. So if you have any questions, or he can correct what I'm telling you to. So he's in there. Yeah, so it's really nice that you can extract stuff, and it works awesome for say like scan data. So you can scan stuff, and then you're not going to have a undo state on that. Like you're just getting the raw data, and you can still pull the surface off of that and then use it elsewhere. All right, so next thing. So we've also had some questions on the ZZoo. So if I open this up here, and let's go to, ooh, I'm all over the place here. Hold on a second. Let's stop that loading. Let's stop that loading. So if you open Lightbox by hitting comma on your keyboard, and you wonder where the ZZoo is, it's right in Lightbox under the project area. And in here we have the ZZoo. And these contains a whole bunch of different animals here. So we've had some questions we've seen online that people are, where's the ZZoo? What is the ZZoo? So the ZZoo is a whole repository of pretty much starting Z-sphere shapes that you can use to start creating things. So these aren't going to be like the exact templates that you can use, but it's going to give you something that's close to the representation of maybe what you want to sculpt, right? So let's say I really want to sculpt, you know, a duck, right? So I can double click that, I can load this duck in, I can then modify this duck as well. So if I want to, you know, move this around, change things, this is all in Z-sphere still. So none of this is set in stone, so you can configure, you can scale, you can do whatever you want. So these are set as like starting points to say, I know I want to sculpt a horse, I know I want to sculpt this duck, but maybe I don't want to sculpt this exact duck, but at least it gives me a starting proportion. I can then change it to the way I want it. And then after I'm happy with it, I can press A, which is going to turn it into a sculptural attribute, which is basically turning it into a Dynamesh at this stage. And then I can start sculpting from there. So the ZZoo is in there as kind of like this helpful starting area that you can use for generating your assets or creations inside of ZBrush. And we find that, you know, instead of doing it from scratch where it's like I want to make a bear, but I don't want to have to, you know, start from scratch on the bear, you now have a starting point. You can load it up and use it. So ZZoo! So one little thing about that, and it's in the project area and the ZZoo folder. So now I'm gonna go back to my file here. Let me drink of water here and check on questions quick. Yes, so we have some questions in chat about Saul's stream. So we had a recording issue on that, so it did not make it. So you'll have Paul's, and then hopefully mine does not have the same thing. And then also, if you see in the middle of my screen here, directly below the sphere, I'll draw an arrow. There you go. Right there, there's a link right there, and that will also take you to some of our other streamers' streams on 2020, so you can find information on 2020 there as well. All right, so to start off, I'm going to start talking about the history recall stuff. So Paul did a lot on the extractor and also the Morph UV. So I want to focus on history recall because I have some things that are pretty cool that are involved with it. So with this, I have a little camel here. And you'll notice as I'm rotating the camel around here, I have my little cam view head up here. And you can see that the camel is not facing the right direction, right? So I went through a lot of models that I've done previously, and I never know where I was, inside, front facing, or back facing. So I want to show you guys how you can fix this if you load a model from the other thing, and also how you can change your cam view too. So the cam view lives in preferences as well, up above the thumbnail area, and in here you have cam view. You can change the size of this by scrolling here, and you can also cycle through cam views and create your own. So I can click next, and you'll see now I'm going to get a different cam view. So there's a demo head, click next again, there's the dog, click next again. Oh, there's Earthquake. Look at him. Look at him. There he is. There he is. And then I made you guys a special one just for this stream. Special cam view. Now they may tell me to turn this off after a while, but I'm turning it on right now. So I'm gonna click next one more time, and boom. There you go. So now I have myself judging me inside of ZBrush, right? And if you kind of do this up and down, you can kind of get him to shake his head. Like, nope, nope, that is not good. Yeah, no, no, no. And yeah, notice there's no fiber mesh on that model. All right, so we're gonna keep that up as cam view for now. And so with this, you'll see that my camel here is not facing front. And so I wanna fix that really quick. And this can be done now fairly easy. So if I go to my subtools there, you can see my camel's got 8 different subtools. So you don't have to go through and rotate every single one of these separately. All you need to do is position your model, and then we're gonna come up here to move, scale, or rotate, which is gonna activate the Gizmo 3D. And then in the Gizmo 3D, we've got this little single pizza box here. So we wanna, you know, as Paul says, is it just a stay home night? We just, you know, eating a pizza by ourselves? Or are we having a party, right? So we're gonna have a party because we wanna move all of these subtools all together. So I'm gonna come over here and turn that on. And now we have 3 pizzas, right? Party time, party time. And with this activated, what this is doing, the process is actually called transpose all selected subtools, not called pizza boxes, but pizza boxes works, is now when I perform a gizmo rotation, it's going to move everything that is selected. And so currently all my eyeballs are visible in my subtool over here, so everything's selected. So if I come over and rotate with the Gizmo 3D, everything's going to go. So if you guys haven't been using this to reposition stuff, especially with the cam view now, definitely this is the way to go. And just to contrast this, if I have the single pizza box and I perform that rotation, it's only going to move one. So just remember, you just staying in, having a pizza for yourself, or you having a party. And so on and off, it's going to go through and set it up for you. So that's how you can fix your cam view stuff there. So now the camel is pointing where beardless myself is looking. There we go. So good. Okay. So now I want to talk about the history recall brush. And I've got a bunch of stuff on the sheet here, so I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick. So if I go too fast, definitely yell in the chat, and I'll try to slow it down, re-explain it, because I have a list. It could go on for a while because I like to talk, so it just happens. All right, so with the history recall brush, it's located in the brush palette, and it's just called history recall. Now what history recall is doing is it's going to look at your undo history, and it's going to allow you to recall a specific stage in that undo history and use it in your current stage. So you're recalling the history of that model. Now with this example here, I've got this kind of pad on his back, and very simplistically I just want to show this down a little low level, and I'm going to show you some cool stuff you can do with it. So with this pad here, what I did was I created two surface noises. So I had a surface noise with this kind of vinyl or fabric pattern, and then I have another surface noise that's going around the edge to kind of give a little kind of like a woolly feel, right? So two surface noises are applied to this mesh, and then I've used history recall to compare those two noises, and then I can pull one from a certain point and then pull another one and then apply them together. So you can use this process, set up a bunch of options on your model, try different things out, and then go back and say, oh, I kind of like that one, let me use a bit of that. Oh, I like this one, let me use a bit of that. So with this, here I have a version of this. I'm going to walk you through using it on this roll part here. Now I created this roll with a ZBrush primitive, and then I just used a deformer to kind of bend it where I wanted it. So easy process to get this kind of shape. If you ever had to like poly model this, it's a pain. So doing it kind of sculptural, thinking outside the box and putting objects together makes it a lot easier. So with this subtool here of this blanket roll, I have a bunch of undos here. So I have this undo, which contains this fabric pattern, and this was all done with surface noise. And then if I go to my zero undo there, you can see I have this one. And if I zoom in here, you can see I kind of have this, it's kind of like that soft, I don't know, I'm missing the term for the fabric here, but kind of like that, I don't know, we're going with it. Not a cotton blend. Felt. There we go. Felt. That's what I was looking for. So I have this felt area, and then I have the pattern. So I want to mix these two together. So I'm going to use the history recall brush, and I'm going to recall the felt here and then apply it to this, right? Now one thing with the history recall is that you want to understand that this is a projection, okay? So it's comparing the mesh state from here to here, and then it's allowing me to project the details from that one state to the current state I'm on, okay? So if I come up to my bar here, I'm going to select this one here, and I want to lock it in as this is the state I want to recall from, okay? So I'm going to come and hold Control and click, very similar to what you're doing with the extractor brushes. So now I've stored this as my state that the brush is going to use, and then I'm going to go back to my current undo. Now with this, I can now come across my model here, and I've got this one loaded, right? So this is loaded. This is what this brush is using right now. It's using the state that I saved up here. So now if I paint on the surface here, ZBrush is going to pick up this and project it to where I'm at on my current state. So as I scrub across this here, you're going to see it's picking up that first one and it's applying it to this one. Now you guys want to make sure you understand that this is a projection. This is not a morph, okay? So you could have whatever geometry on this state over here. As long as it falls in the same location inside of ZBrush, ZBrush is going to be able to pick that up and apply it to your mesh. So it's not a morph, okay? So this is a projection. And with this, when you're using this brush, you want to make sure that you're kind of angled at a good angle on your mesh to apply it. Because if you start applying it towards the end, since it's a projection, it's going to be doing a cast, right? And then it may end up like causing some crazy geometry. So remember, it is a projection, not a morph. So with this, I can now come through and start applying this border, you know, to this rolled fabric here. And what I'm doing is I just have the history recall brush selected, and I'm just sculpting on my model. Now you'll notice this is also going to pick up RGB and also sculptural details. So I'm getting all that pulled in at the same time. And I can also control how much this is going because I have brush settings, right? So I have a focal shift, I have an intensity, I have a draw size. So it's not doing it 100% from this point here. So if I want it to be a nice soft blend, I can control that with the history recall brush settings. And then also pressure sensitivity works well. So if I just want it to get a nice soft edge around the area, I can do it very lightly. And then if I want it to be very harsh, I can press very hard. Now here's an example of kind of how the projection is working, right? So this one, when I was doing it, I went a little bit close to the edge. And so there was nothing for that projection to hit. So if you come across this stuff, you can just smooth that out really quick and then reproject. And that's going to come back in and give you the result you're looking for. And then you can run this, you know, all the way down your edge of the rolled here. And so now I have my fabric and also this other pattern. Now let's say I messed up somewhere, right? So let's say as I was adding this part here, it's maybe a little bit in. Well, here we'll just make it crazy, right? So let's say I did that, right? I was using it, and now I'm like, yeah, that's not what I want. Well, I could undo, but let's say I did this early on in my state, and then I really like what I got up here, but now, you know, I just need to fix this, right? So now I can history recall back to where I just had this pattern on the surface, right? So I'm gonna go to my undo history bar at the top here. I'm gonna go find the one before I started painting, which is this one here. I'm now gonna hold control and set this as my undo history state. So now the history brush is not looking at that first undo, which had that blue kind of felt type feel to it. It's now looking at this one, right? The one with the pattern on it. So now I can go all the way back down to the undo that's at the very end. And now if I use the history recall brush, which one do you think it's doing? It's gonna pull this one I just stored, which was the fabric. And so now if I sculpt across this, I'm getting that fabric pattern back, right? So I'm using the history recall to even go back in and fix things that I did before. So now I can come through and scrub that out. And then let's say I want this area to be a little more detailed. Maybe I want just that kind of felt blue tip to be on the ends, and then I want it kind of spiral in the middle. So I can set this as a small brush size, and I can come in and even add, you know, a little bit of that fabric pattern back to my little cinnamon bun detail here. Right? So there's all sorts of stuff you can do with the history recall. So that is the basic version of it. So we're using one subtool, we're storing a point in history that we want to reference and then apply to the point in history we're at. And that's history recall in a nutshell, right? All right, so now another thing that I just want to hit quick, so you can see that my coloration is a little bit different here. So once again, Paul hit a lot on this, but you can use all these workflows together, right? So let's say I did this with the history recall, I've got what I want, but now the color is a little bit crazy, right? But this is still polypaint information. So once again, in 2020, we've added the ability to adjust your polypaint as well. So I come there to the polypaint area, and there is an adjust color. This is gonna open up this little window here, and you come in and start adjusting these things. So for my little blanket roll here, I wanna maybe adjust the hue a little bit, maybe adjust the saturation, maybe increase the intensity some. So there we go. And this is going to do this all on the fly. You can change all the sliders. Some of these are a little clipped to my name down here. And then after that's done, you can see that change is update. And so now you have another history recall point. So if you don't like those colors, you want to go back and modify them, you can use the history recall brush and just recall back the RGB values. So before and after you modified them in the poly paint area. So all sorts of stuff you can do with it. So really, really powerful. So for the one question here for the surface noise stuff here, I'll show you quick. So let's say I'm going to select the camel here, and to add color to surface noise, basically there's just a slider in the surface noise here. So if I activate surface noise on him, you can see there's a color blend right here. And so he has UVs, so I'm going to put this on and we'll scale this up. And here you have a color blend, so it's going to take the color he has and then I can blend it with another color. So that's how you can get the color using surface noise. So in this little area here will allow you to blend between that color, and it's going to, if you have a color on your mesh, it's going to blend the color here with the color on your model. Also with surface noise, you have a bunch of crazy stuff you can contribute down here. One of my favorite things with surface noise is this offset slider here, which if you crank this up or down, it's going to give you this kind of thing here where it's cutting out the black or white on the surface noise that it's applied, and this gives you some really cool effects. So, but for the color, it's just this color blend slider, and that's in the surface noise. So if you have a model, turn on noise. If you have UVs or 3D, it doesn't matter. And then you have this color blend option here. You pick a color and then blend between it. All right. And yes, if you want to just use the history brush with a color or not sculptural details, you just need to, up here at the top, turn on RGB or turn off Z sub, and then it's going to do one or the other. So it's not, you can do both if you want, but you don't have to. All right, so now I want to talk about the history recall brush and a little bit more advanced state here. Turn off this dynamic. And to kind of show this, I'm going to pull up split screen here. All right, so if you guys aren't aware of this, we snuck this in 2018, one of the point releases. If you go to the transform palette, there's a split screen option here. And what split screen does is it's going to allow you to display your selected model in one window, and then any other subtools that are visible are going to be displayed in a second window. And that lives in the transform palette and split screen. So it's really handy if you have models that are similar poses, or if you're doing, say, anatomy studies, you can have a scanned version of anatomy as your subtool and then have your sculpt as another subtool. You can see your anatomy over here on one side and then sculpt on the other side, and as you rotate in this view, you're going to see the model's going to follow, right? So this is really good for practicing stuff, practicing anatomy, practicing like that. It's very handy because you have now a 3D reference on one side. It's not just a picture, and then you can practice your sculptural stuff on the other side. Now this process here actually just ends up being great to kind of explain also how the history recall brush is working, okay? So not only can you use history recall with a single subtool, but you can also store any other model inside of ZBrush into memory and then use that as the reference point that history recall is going to look at. So as an example, these are two separate models. So I have a version over here that's got the detail, and then I have a blank one. So if I wanted to use history recall and I had this as my stored point, if I came across the model and sculpted the eye, you can see that this location here is going to grab this part over here. If I wanted to start sculpting nodes, this portion here is going to grab over here. So the recall brush is looking at the position of your model in space. So it doesn't care about topology. It's not a morph. It's just looking at where one object is in relation to the other, and then it's going to project from that one surface to the other. And the projection is going to be canvas-based, so camera-based. So it's not going to be doing, a project all like you can do in the tool palette, where it's looking at the normals of the two surfaces and projecting them together. This one's going to go through and it's going to look at where the camera is in location, and it's going to project from this spot to this spot. Any questions on that? Because we're about to get crazy. We're about to get crazy. So that is what history recall is doing. So hopefully this kind of helps. So just think of these two, are two separate models, and ZBrush is viewing them the same way as you move around. So just like you get with split screen mode. All right, so now let's put this into practice. So here I have my blank head, and I've got the history recall brush loaded, and now I want to reference another model as my recall point. right? So I'm gonna come up here and I'm going to select, start with this one here. Actually, we'll start with this one this time. Yeah, we'll do this one. So I'm gonna load this model in, so it's just selected. I'm gonna come up to the top bar here, and now I'm gonna hold Control and click, and that is now going to set that into memory as the mesh I want to recall from. So it's stored this version of the model into ZBrush's memory. So now, if I go back to that blank one, and I zoom in, remember I just showed with the split screen, right? It's repositioning those models the same way, right? So if they were in the same spot, and I rotate, just think of the one in memory is rotating the same way this one is rotating. And now I come across the model, and as I click and drag, it's going to project that history from that other one, sculptural details on that, projecting to the one I'm on. And as long as they're in that same space, this is what you're going to get. Now you'll notice that this is coming in low resolution. And this is just because my initial base here, the blank one I had, is low resolution. So it's projecting the high details from that other mesh, because that's the one I stored in memory. But my current model does not have enough topology to support it, right? So I can undo this, and I can divide this up, and then now do it again, and now I'm going to get a better version of it, right? So that's one option you can do here. Now you'll notice the fall off here is just going to be controlled based on your brush, right? So if I want to, set this down to like a low version, I can sculpt very lightly. It's still going to project, and I'm going to get it added, and now I can blend it out. So you're not, relying on 100% projection using the history recall brush. You can vary it based on whatever brush settings you have the history recall brush set to. So if you want it like a very light projection, you can have the ability to do that using this process. Now I could go through and come through and start, sculpting this into the model here. However, this model is pretty dense, right? So it's already at 1.4. If I wanted to get everything from the other surface, I'd probably have to divide it up a bunch. But I'm going to show you guys a trick that's pretty awesome, right? You haven't seen it yet, but it's awesome. I'm telling you this. So, and this involves using the history recall brush along with Sculptress Pro, okay? So, first let's talk about Sculptress Pro. So I got another sphere here. I'm going to pull this sucker in. So if you guys have never touched ZBrush, or maybe you're upgrading finally from 4.8, I know you guys, there's some out there that are still using 4.8. You can upgrade for free to 2020. What are you guys doing? All right, so Sculptress Pro was added, and it's this little icon up here. And what Sculptress Pro is going to allow you to do is, as you sculpt on your model, it's going to add dynamic tessellation or decimation as you sculpt on the surface. So as an example, here is a sphere here. And let's say I switch to, say, the clay buildup brush, and I just sculpt on it normally without Sculptress Pro active. So I'm going to sculpt along the surface here. You're going to see what is happening is that ZBrush is taking the points that are on the mesh and it's offsetting them, right? So if I turn off my polyframes here, you can see I'm getting some tessellation, some stair stepping on this. And this is just because my mesh right now doesn't have a lot of topology. So I could go through and say divide this up and then do that process again. This is going to get it a little bit smoother. But it's still got a little stair stepping. So instead of doing all that and working on divided meshes, what I can do is then come up here and I can activate Sculptress Pro. Now Sculptress Pro is going to look at the size of my brush, and it's going to try to add polygons to support that sculptural detail. So if I turn on polyframes here and we do it again with Sculptress, you're going to see that it's going to tessimate the model as I sculpt along the surface. So it's adding polygons to the mesh to support that sculpted stroke. So this is Sculptress Pro, and now if I turn it off and do it without, that's the difference, okay? So this is super powerful. I use this all the time. I'm pretty much, if I'm in ZBrush doing anything, I've got Sculptress Pro on. And there's a few things that I change with the settings for Sculptress Pro, which is what I want to show you guys quickly before we get into my next tangent here. So with Sculptress Pro, it's going to add topology based on your brush size. It'll also decrease topology if you have a larger brush size. And the Sculptress Pro will also correlate to your smoothing brush, okay? So if I hold down Shift and I start smoothing, by default, Sculptress Pro is going to smooth, and it may also add topology to it. So it will smooth with tessellation. If you have a large brush size and you smooth, it's going to decimate. So it's going to use the smoothing brush and it's going to decimate or tessimate based on the size of your brush. Well, I personally like the ability of Sculptris Pro to add detail when I'm sculpting, but when I smooth, I don't want it to add polygons when I smooth. So I don't want it to add, I only want it to subtract when I'm smoothing. Or I don't want it to tessimate, I only want it to decimate when smoothing. So this is the standard behavior, hold smooth, and it's based on your brush size, so it'll add geometry if you smooth. So I go up here to the stroke palette, and here's the Sculptris Pro settings here, and I change some things. And so the first thing I do is I turn the combined off. Now what combined is doing is it's doing that process where if I smooth, it's going to add topology and also remove topology based on my brush size. And if I sculpt, it's going to add topology or remove topology based on my brush size. So what I want is when I smooth, it's only going to remove topology. And when I sculpt, it's only going to add topology. So I'm going to turn combined off. And then the next thing I do is I increase my undivide ratio. So this is the amount in which the model will be decimated when I smooth. So I come over here and I usually put this at like 1.5. So now if I come across the surface here and I smooth, you're going to see with that combined off, it's no longer tessimating when I smooth. And then if I smooth across something that has a bunch of details, then it will reduce it, so it will decimate. So my smooth brush now is only going to decimate, it's no longer going to tessimate. And this is just one preference I like using with Sculptris Pro. So pretty much we start ZBrush and it's usually default settings, so every single time I come in here and I usually take combined off and then set my undivide ratio to 1.5. So a little thing there to just kind of describe that before I go use this, because if you try this, the next thing I'm going to show you, it may not handle exactly how I'm doing it. And one of the main things I'm doing is I have combined turned off and then I up my undivide ratio. All right, so now let's get back on track. So here I have a version of the mesh here that's been projected with that history recall, right? So I've added some stuff here. I divided it up some, but it's not like crazy detailed. And so the trick I want to show you guys is you can use the history recall brush with Sculptris Pro. And this is going to open up a lot of flexibility on your models. Now, one thing you want to make sure when you do this process is that you're not concerned. It's not going to retain your current mesh's topology. So Sculptris Pro is going to add and subtract topology as it pleases. So it's going to go through and change that topology. So if you have subdivisions, you're not going to be able to do this. Also, if you need certain morph targets, this isn't going to work for you. But if you're, for sculptural aspects, generating shapes and then projecting stuff later, it's perfect. All right, so with this, I want to add some little morphing stuff to my model here. So I'm going to go and grab another face here, and I'm going to store this with history recall. So I just stored this one now into memory. And now I'm going to go back to my processed one, and let's say with this model I want to swap out the eyes. So yeah, these eyes are okay, but they're not old enough, right? So I want to go through and change this. So I have history recall and I have Sculptris Pro active. So if I come across the eye here and start dragging, this is going to start applying that history recall from the state I had to this one, but it's also using Sculptris Pro at the same time. Now what this means is that, let's say I don't want that detail all over the place. I only want details in little sections, or I want the high fidelity from that history recall thing that I'm projecting from on my model. So the eyes, but maybe in the cheeks I don't need it. It's going to allow me to vary topology on my mesh. So if I zoom in here and I change to a smaller draw size and now project, you're going to see with Sculptris Pro active, I'm going to get higher fidelity in that area based on my draw size. So if I go to like a medium brush size, I can start getting medium details, right? So medium amount. If I go to a really small, I'm going to get finite details. And this is all with Sculptris Pro. So as I'm using this, I can come through and customize where I want that high fidelity detail versus the low fidelity detail. And this is all just going to be based on my brush size. So if I want these wrinkles to really pop out, but I don't want to have my entire model to be like 60 million polygons, I can use Sculptris Pro and just come in here with the history recall brush. It's still going to project from that other model, and now I'm getting those nice details in there, right? So if I turn on my polyframes, let's turn off the fill here, you can see how this is working. So Sculptris Pro is working with the history recall brush, and I'm tailoring where I want the stuff to happen based on my brush size, right? So larger brush size, less detail. Smaller brush size, more detail. And this is projecting from that source mesh that I stored over here. So this is really, really cool in terms of you know, coming through and projecting stuff on my surfaces. So if I do it with a large brush size over here, just as a comparison, you see I can start scrubbing these in here. I can smooth it out and then scrub it back in. And once again, I can blend this stuff together. And this blend is going to be done by my intensity on my history recall, my pressure sensitivity. So you can actually come through and start changing the entire structures and stuff, right? And another thing that's nice with the history recall and using it with Sculptris Pro is that you can easily clean up any of those kind of projection errors. So remember, the history recall is using projection. And so for areas that you're coming around the nose and stuff, you may end up having a little bit of problems getting that projection to be perfect, right? But if you're using Sculptris Pro, let's see here, let me get into the nose here. And so you can see, here we have some projection stuff. So I was projecting from the front, right? So this is going to be a camera projection with history recall. And you see I'm getting this kind of area through here. So what I can do now is I can just hit this with the smooth with Sculptris, which is going to smooth this out. And then now I can reapply that projection. And so now I can come through, cleaning the mesh and projecting at the same time. And so this is going to allow you to get exactly what you're looking for, because now you can navigate all the way around. And remember, you're projecting in a camera angle, and you can come in and start cleaning these areas up. So smoothing it out and then reprojecting, and then depending on what your brush size is, it's going to determine how much of that sculptural details you're going to get. So you guys getting this? Because this is pretty cool. I've been using this a lot to kind of come in and clean stuff up. And so you can see when you're working on things like noses or fingers, the projection stuff, since it's camera angle, you know, you want to make sure that you have it kind of, you're working in the center of the mesh surface, and then you come in and add the stuff there. And then now if I want to switch, you know, to another model to say blend in a little bit more, come over here and let's just pick another one. So let's pick this one here. Let's store this as a history state here, right? So now I got that stored for my history recall brush. Now I go back to this model. Now let's say I want to replace this entire mouth. Come over here, Sculptris brush, boom. And then I can blend this in. Smooth it out if it gets starting too crazy, a little bit too high in places. Just come around, and this is really fun to do. And then now you can start just building, you know, just libraries of faces, and it's way simpler than kind of doing projects or anything else. Like, you're just kind of manipulating it, and you get really nice feel with stuff. And then you can even go like pretty extreme. So let's say I want to increase the jaw, you know, on this character now. So if I go to this one here, this model here has a really strong jaw. So let me store that one, right? So let's come up here and store that. So I'm holding Control and clicking on the undo history point. And then I'm going to the processed one here. And let's now blend that jaw in. So same process coming through, rotating the model. I've got Sculptris Pro active. And I come in and add, you know, a little thicker jaw there. Pulling from that undo history. So really, really cool stuff. Boom. Boom. Explosions. Explosions all over. All right. So that one's been a lot of fun, and especially doing things like this and with the Sculptris Pro, it's been like awesome. So I've been having a lot of fun just making, you know, random people just from old assets. So some of these assets I've had for a while. These are old scan datas I did a long time ago. And now, you know, with this functionality, I can now start, you know, reusing some of these, bringing them back together, and just regenerating artwork from existing things I already had. So it's really awesome. And it'll work across subtools, different tools, whatever you want. So it's just you need to set one and lock it in, and then you're now going to be able to project from it. All right. So that was the Sculptris Pro with history recall. We got a little bit more here. Got a little bit more. You're going to see I've got a few more projects we got to get through. You guys still awake? Getting your stretches? Got your fiber mesh beard growing. All right, it's fish time. All right, so I want to show you guys another little thing using the history recall brush and also using the extractor brushes, right? So this is pretty cool too, because you can kind of use them in tangent of stuff. So let's say I have a model and it has these scales. Now I could go through and just extract them. It's going to give me a result here. But let's say I only had part of the model scaled, right? So I can store the history recall on this, totally different model, come up here, store it, and go to my body here. I can now apply this. You know, this model here has no subdivisions. And I'm using that one that had the scales, and I'm now going to use history recall to grab that information and project it onto this one, right? And remember, this is a projection. So I can come across and drag this out, and now I have this. And, did I have? Oh, I Sculptris Pro turned off. That's what it was. So now I've taken it and I've added the scales to my fish through that projection cycle. Let's say I start doing this, and then now I want to make a brush, right? So I've done the projection with the history recall. I can also now extract this with the extractor brush, right? So now this fish has two undos. So I've got this, and now I can extract this as well. So you can use the history recall to pull information in, and then when it's on the mesh, now you can go back to the extractor and extract the information. So you can use them in tangent, right? So you can add some stuff, use it all over the place. It works really well for scan data because you can have something over here, grab it, put it over here, and then if you want to turn it into a brush, you can then extract it and you're going to need a brush. So now I can grab the extractor here, you hit that G button to grab it, and I can grab it across. And this is now going to give me a nice alpha here, and now I can take this and now apply it to the rest of my fish as an extractor brush. So, all sorts of stuff you can do using history recall and extractor. So for this process here, I didn't need the entire set of scales. I could have just sculpted a little bit of scales, and then I projected it, and then now I've extracted it, and now I have a nice alpha that I can go through and start populating across the rest of the fish. So instead of doing little bits of stuff, try to think about it in creative ways, stealing stuff, adding it to other stuff, using the extraction, using the history recall, projection, magic. There you go. All right, so all sorts of fun stuff there. All right, so now that we got history recall out of the way, we can move on to some other stuff. So the next thing I want to talk about is a snake hook tangent. If you guys aren't using snake hook, there's really no reason why you're not. And this goes back to Sculptris Pro usage as well. So Sculptris Pro, snake hook, they're like best friends. It's like me and Paul, except, you know, the one doesn't get yelled at a lot or all the time. They're just really good friends. All right, so let's go grab a snake hook brush. And here we go. And then I got Sculptris Pro active. Now, one thing you guys are probably already doing, let's make sure I'm facing the right way, is just grabbing it. You got snake hook, using it by default, dragging it out. Okay, since I got Sculptris Pro active, see I'm getting this nice topology generated as I pull the shape out. If I do the same process without it, womp, 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 not what you're looking for. So snake hook in Sculptris Pro is amazing. Now, most of you guys, if you're using it, you're probably just using it as standard, right? You guys need to think out the box more. You gotta think it out. You see there's like these two other options over here that live underneath this brush that you guys can fiddle with. First one here is an alpha. And this and snake hook and Sculptris Pro makes really cool stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna come here and grab this alpha, and let's select the alpha here. We're gonna go with, let's go with say 07, right? Have the snake hook brush, still in dots mode, got my alpha, got Sculptris Pro on. Right, you ready? You ready for this? Is anybody ready? Are you guys still awake? I'm not doing it until you guys say you're ready. Oh man. All right. All right, so here we go. this is what we're going to get. Oh, let me get a little bigger draft size here. Applause. So what this did was, it's taken that alpha, it's restricted the snake hook by the alpha, and now we have magic. Right? Now I have spikes. And that, let's do it again, right? Snake hook. All I did was change the alpha. And now let's add this to our mesh. And depending on where you pull this, you're gonna be able to get it to go further or away. So now I've added these spikes. And this is all snake hook. It's tessellated as it's done this. Now let's switch to another alpha. Let's go say alpha, let's do 21. This one is also pretty crazy. So I can come in, and look at that. All I'm doing is using snake hook, and now I'm getting this kind of textured surface on a mesh, right? Moving this in. Look at that. 2 seconds. 2 seconds creature, right there. Now another bonus trick is that when you use snake hook, you can do the wiggle. All right? You guys are like, what? What the heck are you talking about? You can do the wiggle. Okay. So what this means is, let's go on here, and I'm going to start just, using Sculptris Pro here, and I'm just going to make a little thing like this. And now, I'm just going to wiggle. When you wiggle, the snake hook brush is still active, right? And it's going to enhance those areas. It's going to do this little dance on your model. And what it's going to do, it's going to generate even more kind of surface spikes. So if I come over here and wiggle, now I got these lines coming in, right? If I come over here and start pulling this down and then do the wiggle, look, now it's strengthened all this. So you can see just by doing this and adding a little wiggle, it's going to start popping stuff out. And so this is amazing for coming in and sculpting. So I can come in, add stuff to here, do a little wiggle, and now I've enhanced that edge, right? So I want to enhance over here. Let's do the wiggle. Look at that. From a sphere. All I did, snake hook, 2 alphas. There you go. There you go. All right. So with this, I make a whole bunch of messes. I do a lot of kind of just like shape finding, sculpting, and a lot of it's all snake hooks. So you can see how quick you can kind of get things, and then after you like something, you can change your brush size. So since I have my Sculptris Pro turned on, I can get different details in the areas, and then I can do the wiggle to enhance things and start adding all sorts of things. Now with this, what I was doing is I've gone through and making a bunch of creatures, and they live in a never unfinished state. They just kind of like stay it this way, and that's about it. Then I do another one, and then they'll stay like this. I've got drives full of this, just things like this. And so what I did is I've used this, and I started making a little dragon here. So I was experimenting with the same thing, using the snake hook, using the alphas on the snake hook, and using wiggle, right? And it was giving me this nice kind of, layered type effect. So I'm getting these kind of panels that are appearing on the surface model. These weren't hand carved in. I did no damn standard to get this. All I did was snake hook and wiggle in, and this is what I ended up with. So I have this nice kind of layered pattern that's stacking on top of stuff. So I was liking this. This is looking good. And then while we were developing stuff, we ended up adding this another feature. And this feature, you may guys have seen it before. It's used to be a 2.5D thing called the Deco Brush, right? So we've added a Deco Brush inside of 2020 that works on 3D models, and it uses curves, okay? So let's go over here, and I got a little sphere here, so I'm going to show you the little Deco Brush here. So I'm going to go to the brush palette here, and I'm just going to grab one here. So we've got a Deco Curve Dots, and then we also have a Deco Curve Drag Dot. And we're going to grab the Drag Dot one here. And what this is going to do is to use this, basically you're going to come across your surface, and when you apply it, it's going to give you a curve. all right? And then after the curve has been drawn out, if you grab the curve and move it, it'll apply that across the curve, right? And so the key thing to note here is that the alpha is being generated from the start to the end, and it's stretching it along that surface, right? So if I come in and drag, say, this line out and do it, I can apply that curve. Now, if I come over here and change the alpha, that one was kind of giving you this nice straight line, but let's say I want to do something like this, right? So once again, it's looking at the vertical direction of the alpha, and it's going to generate it across the curve in that direction. So this is something different you couldn't do in, say, 2018. So as I draw this out and drag, now I'm getting this, right? And then you can also, do everything with, changing your brush settings, and now you can start applying these different surfaces using this Deco Curve Brush and Alpha Supply. So back in the day, if you were making any sort of kind of like hair alphas, you were using a lot of Deco Curve Brush. So this is definitely, you can bring it back now and actually get this into a sculptural detail rather than just a 2D alpha that you then would apply. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do, and it's going to take that alpha and stretch it across the curve, and it's going to follow the curve's path, right? So that's the key thing there, is it's stretching across the curve and following the path. So with this and my dragon here, that was done with the sculpture stuff, is that I wanted to come in and I want to add just like a little more values on this. So with the Deco Curve Brush here, I'm going to switch back to my little triangle alpha here, and I'm going to change my draw size and make my intensity down some. And what I found that I like doing with this is using it for kind of edge bumping. So right, so coming through and finding an area and then adding a little raised surface to it. And so with the Deco Curve Brush, it works really well because I can establish the curve. If I don't like it where it is, I don't have to commit to it instantly. And then I can also, adjust it afterwards. So what I was ended up doing with, say, this guy here is I draw the Deco Curve out. So let's say I wanted to edge bump, say, that part there. So I just drew the curve. And then I come over and just tap it, and that would add that detail. Could then come over here, add something like this, tap it, it would add that detail. And so I'd go through with this and just kind of enhance these edges. Now you can also cut in and out with this as well. So if I draw this out and I hold down the Alt key and do it, it's going to cut into the surface. And then if you don't have Alt held, it's going to add it to the surface. So this process was pretty easy to come through, and I was having a lot of fun because it's kind of free form. Like you're not really sculpting the initial stroke. Like you're establishing the curve, and then after you apply the curve, it's going to put this nice kind of smoothing on the curve, which is going to straighten any of your hand mess that you were doing. And then after that's done, you just click it, and it's going to add that bump there. So this was one of the cool things that I was doing a lot with this to kind of get extra elements or extra details across the surface. So rather than using, say, Dam Standard, come in with the Deco brush, and then I could just hit these edges with the curve and pump them up and down. And so as I was going, I ended up with, quite a few of these here, and this was giving, extra areas for light to hit on the model. So it just has a little more bump, and it's kind of getting overload, overload, overload. So that there is a little thing with the Deco brush. Now, I'm looking at the chat questions here. I got one that I can answer really quick. I've been seeing them. Paul's been answering them for me. So for the cam view, you just need to save them into the cam view folder on your machine. And so that'll be in the, I think it's the Z Startup cam view area. And so you can create your own by going to the preferences palette and then do make cam view. Whatever model you have loaded, it'll generate the images to create the cam view. And then just need to save it in that folder. And then when you launch ZBrush, just use the next option until you get to the cam view you want. And then ZBrush will remember which one you chose. And so when you start ZBrush, they'll already be there. So this one here, I had some scan data, and so I just loaded it in and processed it quick. And then that gave me my head as a cam view here that you guys are seeing. You can also edit the image as well. So after it's created, you can take it into Photoshop, do whatever you want to it. And then generate your own too. So there's a lot of flexibility with the cam view. Models is the easiest because it's a single click, but if you want to go and edit it inside of Photoshop, by all means, you can do that too. All right, so that was the Deco Curve Brush there. All right, so now let's see if I can get this to work here. Wait for it, wait for it. All right. So now I want to talk about another thing that's inside 2020, and that is the draft analysis. So drafting is often used in production, so part production. And here I have an example that I just grabbed off of Google here. So there is this little bottle, this little plastic bottle here, and a mold has been created around it so that it can be mass produced. So this is what would be used for, say, producing a lot of products you see in day-to-day life. Now, why this is important is that when you make something like this, you have to use this thing called draft. And drafting is required for production because it's going to allow the part to separate from the mold after it's been cast. So basically, with this example here, there's all these nice curved surfaces, so when this bottle gets cast and that mold comes apart, it comes out nice and easy. Now, usually when you're doing drafting, you have like a 1.5 to 1 degree of draft, and it usually goes up depending on the amount of depth that the part has inside of the mold. So if you viewed any of the ZBrush Summit from this year, Paul Bennett from Hasbro did an extensive talk on this as well, so I highly recommend watching his replay or restream of that, because he covers a lot of this in detail on how drafting and part manipulation works for production stuff. So with this, I've got an example here that I want to kind of run through and kind of show the process, how it works. So I'm going to load this up here. And here I have a little shape. So I do a lot of stuff with ZModeler and also Live Boolean. Live Boolean is ZBrush's Live Boolean preview system, and you can activate it by coming up here. And for this process, basically, I have a bunch of subtools here. You can see all these crazy subtools. And these consist of all little different parts. So if you never used Live Boolean before, basically you can come through and you can generate any subtool inside of ZBrush. And then on these subtools, you have these little icons. And these icons are going to determine, based on the hierarchy of your subtool list, if it's going to be additive, if it's going to be subtractive, if it's going to be an intersection. And when you apply all these together with Live Boolean active, it's going to take all those shapes and generate a preview of your object. So here I have a building block that's all been created inside of ZModeler, and you can see it looks like this. And this is currently in a preview mode. So the Boolean system, or Live Boolean, inside ZBrush is amazing, especially for toy creation, for asset creation, anything. Like if you can think of how to create something with just primitive shapes, you can use it with Live Boolean and generate a final result very quickly. So this has been huge for toy stuff, and then now with the addition of the draft analysis, it's also been extremely handy with this. So after you have your Live Boolean preview, which is what I have here, this is not what the model really looks like at this state, right? It's just a preview. So it's a render preview that ZBrush is showing you of these Live Boolean parts. So if I turn this off, this is what currently the topology looks like. So what I need to do quickly is I need to take this and convert the preview to geometry. And to do this, we just need to go to our tool palettes and then go down to the Boolean area here. And in here, you just have a make Boolean mesh. And this is going to look at your subtool list. It's going to process down the subtool list, and then it's going to find all those different parts. So if part A is going to add, it's going to add it. And then the next one may subtract, so it's going to subtract it. And it's going to continue all the way down until you get your end of your list. So I'm going to click Make Boolean Mesh, and this is going to process really quick. And this process is extremely fast. So that was real time for this. And after it's done, you can see up here, I have my resulting mesh. Now if I turn this off, you can see that this is no longer in Live Boolean, it's the mesh here. And another thing to note, when you're using Live Boolean, it's going to look at the intersections of the geometry. So if you have a geometry model that has tessellation versus one that doesn't have tessellation, the changes are where the intersection occurs is the only thing that's going to change in your topology. So this one's going to be kind of chaos if I want to turn my polyframes on here, because it consists of lots of different geometrical shapes. And you can see that it's only changing the topology where the intersection happens. So Live Boolean is awesome because it does this as well. So you can have a Dynamesh model, you can subtract a key. Your Dynamesh model, that topology is going to stay exactly where it is, and the only change of topology is going to happen where those two parts intersected. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So especially like, hey, I have a model, I've got the sculptural detail where I want it, but I really need to split it in half. You can use a live Boolean system on this. It's going to keep those sculptural details identical to where they were and then give you the resulting parts. So it's really, really powerful. So with the Boolean system here, so now I have this shape and I want to check to see what the draft is on it. And so for this, I come to the transform palette because I want to say put it in a mold and make sure it pops up. So in here, in the transform palette, there's a draw draft analysis button here. And if you activate this, ZBrush is going to take over basically the coloring on your model and it's going to show you in this mode. So this is the draw draft analysis mode. And this can display red and green on your model. And so with this, the first thing you'll notice is that by default, it's going to choose the front of your model as the angle in which it's going to use. So if I rotate myself here, you can see it's using this as the default position for showing how this draft is happening. Well, for this object here, I want it to pop out of a mold, say from this direction and this direction, right? So I don't want my mold to be going sideways. I want it to be going top and down. So I'm going to come to the top here, I'm going to go back to that transform palette, and I'm going to click this set direction. So this is going to now change that draw draft analysis and make it go from the one direction. And this is going to lock this in. So you can move your model around, you can rotate, and it's going to be locked into this direction based on your world scene. So if I come in here and click this, you can see that has now changed my draft angle, and now I have it like this. Now I can rotate. Let me go to a different material here so you guys can see this a little bit better. So you can see I got all greens and yellows on that side and then all reds on that side. And my parting line would be where these two intersect, so right along the borders here. So this is looking pretty good. Now if you have a certain angle of draft that you have to apply, you can change that as well. So you can come to the draft angle here and you can modify this. So as you see, as I change this, I'm going to get those colors to shift a little bit, so they may end up being a little more green, a little less yellow. And if I want to, just as an example, I can put this, say, all the way down to a 0.25 draft, and now you can see that this is giving me basically green and red on both sides. So if my required draft angle was that, then this part is good to go. Now with this, you also want to view it out of perspective, so perspective is going to change it. So we have a little warning here for you. So if you come over and click perspective, it is going to pop up with this little note, because basically the draft angle is going to want to keep it, in orthographic view, and that's going to give you your result. Now you can view it in perspective, but you can see it's not going to give you exactly what you want. So make sure when you're doing this that you're in orthographic when you're viewing the draft angle, especially with the real-time preview. Now let's put this into an example. So I've got my shape, I've calculated the draft, so I've got, it all looks good on one side, all looks good on the other side. Now what can I do with this, right? So you have this part, that's great, I could 3D print it and it's gonna be good, but let's say I wanna do something else with it. Let's say instead of just creating the physical part, let's create the mold, right? And then, hey, we can 3D print the molds, we could mill the molds, and then they're good to go. So to do this, I'm going to use the live Boolean system again, and I'm going to start by making a mold base. So here I have a mold base here. So this is just a mesh that I've just divided up, and then I've tapered one of the sides here so you guys can kind of see how the draft analysis is working on this section here. Now with this is going to be one part of my mold. So I want to append that other part that I just generated and check the draft on. So I'm come to the append option right here. And then I'm going to select my Boolean resulting mesh. So now I have this in my scene. So I have my mold part, and then directly underneath it I have the part that I just checked draft on. And for the part I checked the draft on, I want to set this to subtractive. So I'm going to set this little option here. I'm going to turn on the eyeball icon for my main one. And now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to toggle live Boolean. So I toggle this, it's going to look at my hierarchy in my subtool list again, and it's going to look at these different values. So either the intersection, the subtraction, or the union, the subtraction, or the intersection. So if I turn this on, you can see now I'm going to get this in preview mode. So it's taking my mold box and it's subtracting this part from it. So now I need to turn this into true geometry. So I'm going to go to the Boolean area, make Boolean mesh. It's going to process this. Now I'm going to get a result. So I come up here, I now have this version. And if I turn off live Boolean, you can see this is true geometry here. Now since this part the block itself had these kind of areas that were inside that were separate, I have separate geometry islands on this mesh here. So I can separate this now, and this is going to give me two molds, right? So it's going to give me my negative and my positive, or part A and part B, and then that other part should fit in between. So I can come down to the polygroup area here, and I'm just going to do an auto group. So we're just going to look at the geometry islands and then give a new polygroup to that. Polygrouping is a way you can group polygons on your models, and then you can it allows you to come through and isolate those polygons a lot easier than doing like selections and hide and shows. So let me get some water here quick. All right, so I've done a auto groups on this, and if I turn off my draw draft analysis and turn on my polyframes here, you can see I have different polygroups, right? And so the block itself had these cylinder holes that we ended up using the Boolean system with. So you can see each one of these has a different polygroup color. Well, I'm interested in the outer shell and then this other part here. So I only want this really two parts here. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, which is going to give me the select rectangle brush. And then I'm just going to click on one of these. I'm going to click on the outer shell here. And this is now going to hide those other polygroups and just show the one I selected on. So you can see this is that part A of my mold, right? So now I can go up to the geometry palette here. I can go to split, and now I can do a split hidden. So it's going to take everything that was hidden, which was the other parts of the mold, and now it's going to break those off into a new subtool. So now I have this part, and I can move this off into space here. My part A, I have my part B, right? And now if I say select one of these, like this one here, I can check the drafting on this now. So I'm going to come up here to transform again and turn on the draw draft analysis, set my direction. I can rotate around here, looking pretty good. I can go to the other part, check that one as well. Looking good. And now let's put it all together to kind of show how this happened. So I've got these two there. I'll turn on perspective. I'm going to append in my original part. So now I have part A, right? I've got my piece, which would fit into part A, and then I've got part B, which would come and fit into that piece as well. So through that process there, I first checked the part for drafting. I've then now created the A and B parts of the mold, and you can see they all go together. So that is one way in which you can use the drafting and the processes of live Boolean inside of ZBrush to go from a part to checking it to making a mold, and now you have the pieces needed to produce that part. All sorts of craziness. So there's a question in chat about doing drafting based on the polypaint as well. So if you want to actually turn this into, say, polypaint, let's say I take this part here, and instead of coming up here and using this draw draft analysis option here, what you can do is there's also the draft lives inside the polypaint area. And so we go to the polypaint area here, you have from draft. This is going to capture the options you chose in the transform one, so the real-time one. And if you do this, it will now apply the drafting as polypaint. So you can definitely take the drafting and apply it as polypaint on your model, and then you can use that for painting purposes. You can use it to, say, projection purposes to get into a map, all sorts of stuff. So definitely you can do it with polypaint as well for the draft analysis. And the process that the draft will use for the polypaint version does have a little different algorithm applied to it, so it's going to give you a little better fidelity out of it. So it's good practice, you know, if you have something that you want to 100% make sure it's going to draft, use the transform one, the real-time one, get it to where you want, and then double check it with the polypaint, and then you should be good to go. So polypaint one there. Now with the drafting, it's not only for parts of production, so you can use it in other things as well. So one example here I have is, here is my camel again. And as I was sculpting this, basically for this little pad here, I just took a sphere and then just started deforming the sphere, right? So I took the sphere, started deforming it, got what I wanted, ended up with something like this. Well, at this stage, I wanted to, break it down and then apply some UVs to it. And to do this, I knew, just by looking at the shape, that in order to break this up into a nice set of UVs, I need a bottom UV and a top UV, right? So I need two different UV islands so I can separate it. This is a perfect candidate for drafting, right? So if I turn on this, and I come up here and turn on my draft and set my angle, you can see that this is going to give me that part broken into two. Now I could have gone through and instead of using the drafting here, came in and manually masked this out. So say came in and got a brush size, held down control and tried to mask out that area there, but it's going to take a little while, right? So I can use the drafting because it's going to take the projection from one side and then any faces that are going there that are following that angle of draft are going to get one side and then the other side is going to get the other side. And so I can do it in real time. I could do it by polypaint, but you can also use it with masking. So not only do you have the draw draft analysis in the transform palette, which is the real-time one, not only do you have the draw draft analysis in the polypaint area, but you also have it in the masking area. So if I come over here and now click mask by draft, it's going to take that angle I already had set. I can reset it if I want. And now it's going to apply that draft by masking. So you see now I have this as a masked surface. Now with this being a masked surface, I can now use other properties inside of ZBrush. So I can use this mask and I can take the mask and now turn it into polygroups, right? So to do this, I can go to the polygroup area and open this up. And in here we have a group masked, clear masked button. And this is also hotkeyed to Control W. So if you're doing polygrouping, you know, basically you can come through, mask something out, hit Control W, it's going to give that masked area a new polygroup, and then you can use that to kind of deform your mesh, hide and show things, makes things a lot easier. So with this draft, I've established the mask, and now I can hit Control W or click this Group Mask, Clear Mask, and if I turn on my polyframes here, you can see I now have a new polygroup. So now that I've broken this part into polygrouping, it only took me a second because of the draft, rather than me going in and masking it out manually, I can now come up to, say, the ZRemesher here, and I can go to the Keep Groups option, make sure that's turned on, and now I can process this. It's going to look at those groups and it's going to try to find a nice smooth line or generate a smooth line between those groups and then give me a new mesh, right? So this is what I did for this part here. So I basically sculpted it, made a mess, lots of Sculptris Pro, maybe some snake hook, you never know, and then used the draw draft to generate my polygrouping. And then now I'm using ZRemesher with the Keep Groups option to come through and clean this up. Now I usually run ZRemesher a few times on a model, and I often will keep this half option on. So this is going to take the topology you have and then it's going to cut it by half, right? And so this will end up cleaning up some of these things there. So you notice like initially this part right through here had a little like hiccup because when I did the mask, I didn't do it by a loop when I did it. I just did the mask directly to the polygons. And so when you actually apply the ZRemesher multiple times, it's going to smooth that out. And now I'm going to get a nice smooth edge. So you can see after running ZRemesher a few times with the half option, I now have this as my resulting mesh. So now at this stage, I need to break this up into two islands for UV, right? So this is good to go right now. I could unwrap this with UV Master and it would end up giving me the parts I want. But then I have this seam that's kind of going on the edge here. So another little thing you can do, since ZRemesher gave me this nice kind of edge looping around the surface of the model, is that I can isolate one part of this polygroup here, and now I can expand the loops outward, right? And this is done with a hotkey, so Control-Shift-X will expand your hidden part out by 1. Control-Shift-S will shrink it. And this is handy just on visibility, so you can go in and out and in and out. So I want to just keep going out, so Control-Shift-X, and I'm going to get it just so I have a little bit of lip right there. And now with only this parts visible, I can hit that Control-W again, which is Group Mask, Ungroup Mask. Oh, actually, I can't pronounce it. It's a Group Mask, Clear Mask. There we go. And so this is going to do the same thing, so nothing's masked, so it's going to apply one polygroup to everything, and now I can hit Control-Z and bring it back, and so I should have, let's get a different color on this. Let's do it again. There we go. Now I have my model broken into those two parts. And now I can come up to Z plugin, go to UV Master, turn polyprops on, unwrap, boom, done. Right? Sculpted mesh, fold it over, need to generate some polygroups, use the draft, generate a mask, mask to polygroups to ZRemesher, ZRemesher to UVs, done. So Other handy things you can use with drafting. It doesn't just have to be for part creation. You can use it for production to actually end up getting different things. Just think about it smartly, right? So you just draft at an angle. It's going to speed up some of your workflows. All sorts of fun stuff. Whew. All right. So now, on to the last. There's a few things here. So I think Paul's been feeding through all this stuff here and the questions. I've been ignoring you guys. Sorry. Been working on my fiber mesh beard. All right. So now I got another example model here. So this is a little creature I sculpted a little while ago too, and he was all done with Dynamesh. So if I turn on my polyframes here, you can see he's quite a little dense. And so with this, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through and say 3D print them out, and I wanted to use one of the other options that we've added in 2020, which is the ability to check your thickness on a model. So this is my little example on here. We're going to go through this. So with this dyno, I sculpted them, and then once again, I wanted to kind of just clean them up a little bit, so I used ZBrush. And if you haven't used ZBrush, it gives pretty amazing results. And so as an example, I have this dyno. Here's 1.2 million, and I ZBrushed them, and this is the result it gave me. Right? It's pretty much, if I was going to hand topologize this would be exactly what I'd do. So it gave an awesome result on this, and it's one of those things that was just like, this one's like super good. So I had to show it. So this is what it started with, this crazy Dynamesh model, and then ZBrush, one click, boom. Right? So awesome stuff. So with the ZBrush version here, I wanted to send this to print. And so with the printer I was printing on, let's say 2 millimeters was the wall thickness I needed for something. So if the print was going to succeed, I needed to make sure that everything on the model was at least 2 millimeters thick. So as an example, here I have a little 2 millimeter cube right here. So this model is set to about 4 inches tall. And then here we have that little cube down at the bottom there. And it's not blocked by the graphic. Look at that. So it's sneaking out of that graphic there. So I wanted to check this and see, hey, what's this looking like in terms of thickness? So in the tool palettes, if we go all the way down here, let me close some of these things here. We're going to go to the, man, I got to remember so many things. Go to the polypaint area, and in here we have a from thickness area. So the thickness operation is going to calculate the thickness on your model, and this is going to be based on the size, right? So it's generic size inside of ZBrush. And the generic size is based on 2 different values, okay? So the first option it's looking at is your geometry size sliders right through here. So this is the first values that ZBrush is looking at when it generates size information. So these are, think of them as generic values, and then it'll also look at the export scale, right? So your size of your model in generic units is going to be these XYZ sliders multiplied by this export value. And then these sliders right here are going to be that same generic unit value, okay? So if my model is 100, right, 100 generic units from top to bottom, this is going to be, whatever value I have in here is going to be, say if it's 3, it's going to be 3 of those generic units. So just remember that when you're doing this. Now if you're going through and using, say, Scale Master, Scale Master is going to default your models to be set into millimeters. So you're going to get a reading that's in centimeters, inches, or feet, but it's going to set up your ZBrush scene to register as millimeters. So if you ran a model through Scale Master, it's going to do the scale and the XYZ size, and it should lock it into that millimeter value. And then from there on, if you've had your model set up like that, you can refer to these sliders here as millimeter values on your mesh. So this model has already been set up using Scale Master, so millimeters is what we're going to refer to these generic units as. So I want to check to see what on this model falls into that 2 millimeter thickness. So I'm going to turn off my polyframes here so you guys can see this a little better and maybe change it to skin shade 4. Now you have two sliders here, and this is going to allow you to describe a range of thickness on your model. So you have a min thickness and a max thickness. And depending on where these values are, you're going to be able to kind of, let's see, I get here, kind of scale the gradients that are going to come in between them, right? And these gradients are living up here in the preferences, and then if you go to the analysis, here you have your color stuff here. So for this demo, basically I just need to know what's 2 millimeters, what's not. So I'm going to clamp these down and get two colors out of my analysis here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm come to my max thickness, and I'm just going to put this all the way down to 0. So I just want to zero it out as low as it can go. And then for my min thickness, I'm going to set this to 2. And so when you change your min thickness, the max thickness is going to go with it. So it's kind of going to keep it in that kind of plane there. And if you change your max, the min's going to go with it. So as a practice, basically if you want the min thickness, zero out your max thickness first, then type in the min thickness, and then you're going to get what you're looking for. If you want to go the other way, do the reverse. So with the model here, I've got it set up, and now I can click from thickness, and this is going to analyze the model, and this is the result I'm getting. So you can see most of the model is blue, so he's falling into that 2 millimeters of thickness. Now you will notice that in some areas I'm getting this red value here, and you'll see it's going to happen quite a bit along the edges of the mesh. So one thing to notice about this is that this is 2 millimeters thick on the inside, but the calculation is going through and it's rolling around the model to calculate that thickness. So if you have an edge, and when it's calculating at a diagonal, like this through here, this part right there is not 2 millimeters in thickness, right? So this direction, it may be 2 millimeters, but if you go this angled like this, that would not be in 2 millimeters. So that is why you'll get sometimes red on the edges of parts of your model when you're using from thickness. Now this model would probably be pretty okay in terms of a lot of this to print out. The one things that I would come in and fix on would be these tips of these horns there, because that area, that little circle dimension, probably would not be that 2 millimeters of thickness. And so if I wanted them to be a specific height or needed them a specific height, I would want to make sure that I had enough volume in that area to calculate that. So with the dyno here, you can see that he's falling all in there. But if I send this to print, he's also solid right now. This is an entire solid model. So he's going to be pretty heavy, going to cost a lot of materials, and especially at 4 inches, if I send him to something in resin, that's a lot of resin usage, right? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to generate him hollow and then send a hollow version of him, right? So I'm going to come up here to my subtool palette. And to generate the hollowed version, what I did was I used the live Boolean system again. So I made a interior cavity of my dinosaur here. So here's what we had here. And I made a little spout at the end. And then of course it's been ZBrush just to clean it up. And now if I use the live Boolean system and turn both these on, turn on live Boolean, you can see I'm now getting a live Boolean preview where I have my model and then I have that interior cavity being set to subtractive, so I'm getting this in a preview Boolean mode. Now after I have this set up, I can now process this and turn it into true geometry. So that would just be done by going to the Boolean option and clicking Make Boolean Mesh. And the resulting mesh I got out of that is this one here. So let me turn off live Boolean here. And here's what I have. Now you'll notice that the topology stayed the same on the two models except where the intersection happened, which was at this hole here. Since I had that spout coming in from one and then the shell on the other one, the difference happened in between. So those points of geometry where they intersected changed, and that's where I'm getting these little triangle areas here. But the rest of the topology on both the inner surface and the outer surface stayed the same. And that's one of the nice benefits of live Boolean. Now since I use the Boolean process for this as well, I have this kind of segregated mesh where I have an interior polygroup and an outer polygroup. And this will allow me to do things like just see the inside or just see the outside. So now I can take my model and let's check this to see if I can print them. So I'm gonna come down here to the polypane area again. I'm gonna zero out my max thickness, set 2 for my min thickness, and now click from thickness. And this is now what I'm getting now. So you'll see here that I did do the hollowing on my mesh here, but you can see I only have that 2 millimeters thickness in some areas on my model. So it's not globally across everything. So at this stage, I could go back to the live Boolean one and manipulate it and do things like that. But I can also just use this model and change it and then run the from thickness again until I get what I want out of it. Now, since I have that interior polygrouping on this mesh, this process is pretty quick, right? So I can come in and say, select that inner part. And this is going to be displaying in that negative kind of flipped fashion. If you want to kind of make this easier on yourself, you can flip the normals temporarily on this and then see it in a positive form and then flip them back before you unhide everything. So to do this, I'm going to go to display properties and I'm going to click flip, and it's just going to flip it over like this. I'm going to turn off colorize here for a second. And now I want to deflate this a little bit. So this is the interior cavity. I've taken the normals, I've flipped them, and now I want to use a deformer to deflate it, so get it a little bit smaller into the surface. So I'm going to go to the deformation menu here. I'm going to go to the inflate and crank it down a little bit and just deflate that a little bit. And what this is doing, it's condensing that inner cavity. So it's going to give me greater distance between the inner cavity and the outer cavity, which is giving me more wall thickness, which is going to allow me to print it. Okay? Now when you do this, if you have areas in a model that are very sharp, like angles like this, they're going to have the tendency to kind of do this kind of thing where they're going to cross, right? So we want to go through and resolve those quickly as well, and this can be done with just a polish, right? So after I've done the inflate, I come to polish, I can activate this white circle here, and then polish, and I can come through and polish this out. Now depending on how harsh your edges are, it may take a little while there to get it polished, but that's pretty good there. You could also manually smooth this if you want, so you can come through with any sculpting brushes and smooth, and that would also come through and smooth out those surfaces. So just taking that cavity, smoothing it down, making it a little bit smaller. Now the reason I didn't use a scale and I used the inflate instead is that the inflate is going to look at the topology, right? It's going to look at those surfaces and it's going to pull the surface normals in. If I did a scale, it's going to look at the relation of the surface to that center point of that mesh. And so the scale can offset sometimes, and you don't want it to offset because then you could have thicker parts here, thinner parts there. So inflating is going to be a better function than going in and scaling. So just one thing there with that. Now after I have that good to go, I'm going to flip it back to give it back to the interior cavity there. I'm going to hold Control and Shift and bring everything back. So now I have my dinosaur and his cavity's been adjusted. And now I come in and click from thickness again. And you can see now I'm getting a much better result. So I've shrunk that inner cavity in, my wall thickness has increased, so I've gotten a lot more of that there. I still have some areas that I come through and clean up, and these can be done easily. If you want to make sure that all your surfaces are good, you can use something like the inflate brush and hit these areas through here and then do from thickness again. You can also smooth these out as well. So using smooths and inflates, you can come in and just make sure everything falls into that exact size you want it to be. And then after you're done with this, you can send it off to get printed, and you should be safe having that wall thickness all the way through. So little thing there with the from thickness option here inside of 2020. All right, you guys still awake? You guys still good? Doing a little stretch here. I got one more thing, and then I'll let you guys go. You still hanging in? All right. So, moving on. So, this last one is one of my other favorite additions, and there's a lot of ways you can use it. And I want to kind of break it down in the simplest way possible, because when I actually got into the version of ZBrush, Paul was like, "What does this do?" Like, he just couldn't get it. I don't know why. Seemed pretty obvious to me. So anyway, so I want to walk through this in like a simplistic form so you guys grasp what this is doing. And so what I'm talking about is over in the brush palette here in the depth area, there is an option called infinite depth. Okay, and what this is going to allow you to do is going to allow you to use the depth of the canvas or the depth of your model's world space to manipulate the surface. Okay, and this can be used with any brush. The primary ones that are usually the best are the Move brush and also Snake Hook with Sculptress Pro. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to use Move without it first, right? So let's say I have the dog model here, get out of perspective, and I need to make him wider, right? He's a little bit too thin. Right, so he needs to bulk up. You know, he's he's been being a good boy. He's been on that, spot in the house really well, and you keep feeding him cookies, right? So the longer he sits on the spot, the more cookies you give him, and now he's getting a little bit big. So I'm gonna take my move brush here, and I wanna, beef him up, right? So I come to the front, and I wanna widen him through here. So I go through and start doing this. Okay, that's looking good. But we got a little problem. So all the food went into arm day, and none of the food went into leg day, right? So if I wanted to make him larger all the way through, I'd have to first pull this part out, then pull this one, and go all the way down the model to try to extend him out, right? It's a lot of clicks through there. And you'll notice this will also come into play, like say if I want to, say, enlarge his area right here and bring it upwards. So if I click and drag this, you see I'm gonna get this little slope in between here, right? Now you could mask this out and use the Gizmo 3D and do it, but that's still a few processes you may not want to do. So instead of doing all that, I can take my move brush here, we'll get back to my dog, and now I can come up to the brush palette and go to the depth area, and I can activate infinite depth. Now on the infinite depth button, there are these little X, Y, and Z buttons too, and these are going to add another element of control with this brush. So I have these off right now, and I'll come over here and I'm just going to activate this, and this is going to put it in infinite depth mode. And what this is going to do, it's now going to use your canvas space. So a lot of the stuff inside of here is looking at the projection, canvases, depth. It's all kind of related. And for this, it's going to be based on how I have the model positioned. So if I'm facing front right here, and now I perform that move to make him a little bit bigger, he's being a lot of cookies. You can see it's going to do it here, and then if I rotate, you see it's done it all the way alongside the dog as well. So it's taken the move brush, and now it's applied an infinite amount of depth. So anything behind where I grab is going to move too. Okay, you guys getting this? So now, if I go in like this, see he's all going in, right? What about that side thing, right? So then I want to extend this, right? I'm no longer getting that trough, right? It's now moving the entire part. So this is huge because I don't know how many hours I've spent where I've come to the side of the model and I need to adjust a profile, and I'll go in and I'll do this, and then I rotate and there's a divot. And then I got to go in and smooth the divot out, change it, do some other things. This has taken away all those issues, and now I can just turn it on and move the part and enlarge that thing, and I know it's going to go all the way through the model and get every single part that's in there and move it as well. So it's really awesome for silhouette changing. Goes great with the silhouette mode, thumbnail view. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now with this, there are some options for this as well, and these are the world axis buttons that live on this thing here. So this is going to allow you to perform this infinite depth, but it's going to be locked into a specific axis in the world. So with the dog here, I was making him wider, along the Z axis. So if I want to see how that's going to perform or handle when I'm in this view, what I can do is I can go to the brush palette, go to that infinite depth, I can activate Z, and now Z is going to be active. And now if I come across my model, I don't have to have the camera positioned exactly to perform that same function. It's going to look along the Z of this model. And when I do this, it's going to move it all like so. And if I have this little smaller draw size here, you can see that it's going all the way down. So now you can use this not only by camera axis, but you can lock it to certain axes. And so now if you want to say, okay, I need to make him larger, but I don't know, I need to kind of see him at this angle, maybe I need to see him in perspective, and now you can do that, and it's going to actually go through and change it. So you don't have to go straight to ortho, you can just do it at the perspective you want, lock it into that certain angle, and then you're going to be able to do it. Now another thing with this is that it's going to work with any other brush, right? So we talked about Sculptris Pro earlier, so you can use this with Sculptris Pro as well. So I'm going to come over here and grab, or not Sculptris Pro, Snake Hook and Sculptris Pro, my Snake Hook brush here. And let's first do it with the brush depth just turned on, no X, Y, and Z. Come across the model here, drag this out. Oh, let's make sure that Sculptris Pro is on. Drag this out, see it's going to go all the way through, right? So you can use this now to adjust stuff with Sculptris Pro 2. So if I want to add different things in here, cut these out, do a little wiggle, you never know, smooth, and you see it's going to affect all the way through the mesh, right? All the way through. So really cool stuff using the infinite depth option. Now there's one more thing I want to show you with infinite depth. That's amazing. So here I have a mech part here. This is a torso for an unfinished mech. Eventually it may turn into something. You never know. You never know. So with this, I've gone through and I have a lot of individual parts. So I do a lot of shape part finding. Dynamic mode is also really big. So let's take this part here as an example. This is just these little panels at the bottom here. If I turn my polyframes, you can see it's pretty low geometry. So it's created with ZBrush. I actually have gone through with the geometry option here, and I have a dynamic subdivision applied, and I'm also using QGrid. So if you guys have never used QGrid, QGrid is amazing. So basically with dynamic subdivision, you have like two different types of dynamic subdivision. You have dynamic subdivision for round things, and you have dynamic subdivision for hard things. And the difference between these two is this QGrid slider right here. So QGrid is going to go through and it's going to find edge loops on every single edge on your model. So if I zoom into this mesh here, you can see it's got these little kind of edge loops going on. If I turn on the polyframes here, you see I'm getting this bevel through here. And this is because of QGrid. So if I turn QGrid off, this is what I'm getting. If I turn QGrid on, it's going to go and give me nice edge bumps through there. I can then change the coverage on this and make it more smooth or more tessellated. Hard, soft, get some nice little bevels there. And this is doing it on every single edge. Now, if I had a round surface, this wouldn't quite work because QGrid is going to look at all those edges. And so if you have a cylinder, it's got all the edges around the edges, you're going to get an edge on every You're going to edge bump on every single edge on your model. So think of dynamic subdivision for circular stuff, no QGrid. Dynamic subdivisions for hard surface stuff, QGrid. And you end up getting a lot of cool stuff. So this whole model here is broken into different parts. So anything that's round is using dynamic, no QGrid, and anything that's got that hard edge using QGrid. So it's pretty cool. The QGrid stuff's amazing because it's going to give you that nice beveled edge, and then you're still manipulating that really low version of it. So as an example, these parts here, let's say I want to come through and I want to manipulate one of these. We're going to go back to our move brush. We turn off my dynamic here. Let's say I want to manipulate this, right? So I got symmetry turned on. So say I got my little pointers here and here. Let's say I want to adjust this, right? So I come through here, I grab this, and I start pulling. See what happens? Right? It's getting the faces that I clicked on, but these inner areas here no longer got, right? So now I need to come through and say, do this again to try to get those lined up. Maybe I have to go through a mask, try to get it lined up. But basically I want all these things to go at once. So now what I can do is I can go to the brush palette with that move. I can activate the infinite depth here. And I'm also going to activate the option here for X, which is the axis I want to go down on this. I could just use camera plane. And now with this, I can come through, and if I start grabbing these, right, I can deform this entire panel. Come in and give it even more bevel, extend these out, play it around with it, and look, it's doing it across all of them. And since I have it locked into that angle, I can come to the side and start changing this. And I can see this update on the fly. So this is awesome because now I can come and I can manipulate my shapes. I can try new things with my model. And I don't have to do like extra work for it. So I can just come through, start pulling these out, getting that shape where I want it to go. And it's doing it all the way through. So this has been a huge time saver in terms of hard surface modeling, especially in Z-modeler geometry, things like that. I can come in and precisely grab one point. I know it's going to follow all the points along that same depth, and then I can move them around. Now, one more bonus thing with the infinite depth that I want to show you guys, and then I think I'm done, is let's say you have some parts on your model like these little pieces here. So you can see I have all these little rivets that are all over the place. So what I want to do is, since I've manipulated this, I now want to move these rivets back to where they make sense. Like they're hanging out in the middle, I don't want them there. So normally what I do in the past is I'd come through and say, let's mask this out, let's invert the mask, let's grab the Gizmo 3D, let's center the Gizmo 3D, and then let's move the point, right? So now I've taken that, went through those steps, and I've now moved that point. Well, now instead of doing that, I can go and make sure that my move brush has that infinite depth on. I can set my focal shift to -100. And now, as long as I come across something that falls into the radius of that brush, if I click and drag, it's going to just move it. Move it. Let's move that there. Let's move that over there. Let's move this one there. Let's move this there. Let's move that there. Let's move this here. So much easier. So what I'm doing here is this focal shift is basically saying move everything that falls in that circle 100%. I don't want any fall off. You just go ahead and move that. And since I have infinite depth on, it's going to move it across all of those that are in that depth plane. And so it's not just going to grab that one point and distort it, it's going all the way through. So now I can just move these around, and you'll see it's going on the other side too. So since this had symmetrical parts, I can come through and now adjust all these little circle things. I don't have to do that masking. I don't have to do that Gizmo 3D. I can just come in here and have fun and get it done. All right, so move infinite depth. It's amazing. Tell Paul he's crazy. All right, so I think that we're almost at the end. I got one more thing. We need to do a little recap here if I can get my find my cursor here. All right, so once again, thank you guys for showing up and tuning in to the ZBrush 2020 streams. We'll have these replaying on these little thing down here at the bottom, so that little link there, we'll have these up for replay so you guys can rewatch these. You can study them up, show them to your friends, all that good stuff. I want to make sure you guys are aware, once again, that if you are a current license holder for 2020, or for any version of ZBrush, this upgrade is free. So there's some of you out there that are still using that 4R8, still using it, still sending me bug reports on 4R8. Go on, upgrade to 2020. It's free. Free. Okay. If you're not a user of ZBrush, we have multiple ways you can get into ZBrush here. And currently, we are offering a launch special for 2020. So we're taking a percentage off for your first month of the monthly prescription, the first month of your 6-month subscription, or a percentage off of the perpetual license as well. Now, once again, with the perpetual stuff, if you've bought ZBrush, all the upgrades have been free. So I bought ZBrush when it was around $400 some, and I never had to pay a thing. And I've been using ZBrush like pretty much as my #1 3D software. So in games, and then transferred now to with Pixelogic as well. So it's been one of the best investments I've ever paid for. And so that still stands in terms of the never expiring. So one-time cost, never expires, and that's the perpetual license. If you know anyone that is an artistic person and needs a copy of ZBrush for Christmas, hey, just throwing it out there. Holidays are around the corner. Holidays are around the corner. Also, if you guys are using ZBrush Core, there's also an upgrade plan for ZBrush Core, and we're also giving a launch special on that as well. So once again, this launch special is only going on for I think about a little less than 2 weeks, and it's going to be over. So make sure you guys are thinking about partaking in this launch special. We don't do this. Well, I don't think we've ever done this. So it's very rare that we do these sorts of things. So now is the time to buy in. I think that is it. For the draft angles, you just missed it if you tuned in. I did go through that process. It will be on our replay system here. And then I think Paul's been hitting the chats up. I don't know if Paul missed any. If you can give me that ones quickly here. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm kind of reading chat, not really reading chat. You guys guessed it. Let's see what we got here. Let's see what we got here. I kind of get started and then I just go off on my own and just, it's like, oh yeah, there was chat stuff too. Let's see. So Peel is still in development. It's not sunny in my backyard currently. It's definitely not sunny. It's kind of cold. It looks like it's going to snow. So the draft analysis stuff is currently inside there's different drafted ways. So we went a whole thing on making a kind of construction block for that. And so there's a real-time one that's in Transform Palette, then you have a masking one, and you also have a poly paint one. And just those are going to allow you to set your angle of draft, and then you can apply those to your meshes. And then these will be replayed too, so definitely if you missed the draft section, directly in the middle of my screen there's a little link there, so these will go up again and you can go through it. To turn off draft, you just need to go to the Transform Palette and then just disable it. So here, let me see if I can show that quick. So if you want it off, it's in here, and it's just right here. Just draw draft analysis. So toggling it on is going to display it, toggling off is going to turn it off. And if you have it where you've taken the draft analysis and applied it to polypaint, that is now polypainting your model. So just make sure. The wall thickness checker lives in the polypaint area, so it is a calculation. Once you have the mesh loaded, you can then change your option sliders over here, but you will have to, it does need to do a calculation, so take your model, calculate it, and then give you the result. So the current colors for the draft are green, red, and yellow. That's usually the standard for draft stuff. That is one thing we'll probably look into for future development stuff, because my colors between red and green, not very good. Can't see them too well. The beard trim brush is just the clip brush, or the trim brush. You can take a fiber mesh, use the trim brush on it, and it'll clip it right out. And the gloves were done by, Paul may have to hit up in the chat for that. Man, I should remember this. He's an awesome ZBrush artist, and he's been making the gloves. Just search ZBrush Summit gloves. I can't recall the URL right now. Someone in the chat should know it too. He has a whole bunch of different styles that he does. Well, thank you all. Mike Morgan, yes, Mike Morgan Designs. We're always looking for stuff, so topology, no one likes it. No one likes topology. Doing it manually. ZBrush has been a huge saver. I still do a lot of Z-sphere topology, is what I end up doing. So with a ZBrush version of your model, you can actually use that as a starting cage. So you can ZBrush, get a starting cage, and then modify that, which helps quite a bit. But you never know. We're always developing. Always developing. Well, thank you all for tuning in to the stream here. I hope you guys learned something and maybe got inspired to do some things with 2020. Once again, the launch special here is only going on for a little bit less than 2 weeks. So if you're not thank you for posting the link to the artistglove.com is the thing there. Thank you, Melissa. I think that's it. So thank you all for tuning in, and happy ZBrushing. Take care, you guys.